Hey y'all, and welcome back to another Photoshop tutorial where every Monday we go through some tips and techniques to streamline your Photoshop workflow. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the basics of portrait editing. The very basics. This is not the advanced level, so if you're basic and intro to Photoshop, this is the place for you. If you're more advanced, wait a little while or visit another one of my collaborators' channels and see their techniques if you're a little bit more than basic. But I encourage you to stick around because it's really nice to see other people's workflow and see sort of how people do things a little differently in Photoshop to really streamline your workflow as well. So back on track, we are here today to talk about the basic editing of a portrait. I've got two images that we're going to work with. I've got this image of Zach that we're going to start off with here, and then I have a image of Miss Sydney by the river that is out of studio to give you a little variation on the different types of editing, but you will see a lot of the same themes and techniques in both of these images. First and foremost, before you start any Photoshop project, if you start with an image on your background, duplicate it. Drag the background copy down to the new layer icon down here to duplicate it, or you can hit Control or Command J and it will make a copy of the background layer. I'm going to delete that duplicate copy so we just have the one background copy to work with, and the reason why we have a background copy and a background negative is so that you do not damage this background copy negative, and all of your adjustments are on a background copy, so if you're wanting to add blending modes or filters, you're not going to degrade the bottom layer. You'll always have an original to work with or a negative. So let's get started. I like to start with my shadows and my highlights and evening out the skin tone. The way that I do that is I do two sample colors, one for a foreground color and one for a background color. To switch between the foreground and background color, simply hit the letter X on your keyboard. So let me show you how to do that. I for eyedropper, and you're going to select one of the highlight colors, either on the cheek or on this big panel on the forehead, where you can select this peachy color. By hitting X, you select to the background color or the shadow color in this case, and we're going to select an average shadow color, not really dark right here, not really light shadow up here, but kind of here in the mid-range, so that you have two variations of colors to choose from. We're going to add these colors to all parts of Zach's skin so that we can bump up the smoothness of his skin tone. So we'll hit B for brush, and with a lower opacity, 10%, you can even go to 5% by hitting your enter button, using your number pad, and then hitting enter again to choose your selected opacity. Let's get into the painting. We are on our background color now. I want to switch to our foreground color, which is our highlight color, and begin painting to accentuate those highlight areas. This will even up these areas where maybe there was a little bruising in this area, or even just a little flushness in the face. If he was crying on the way over, it probably put a little pink in his face. You can change the brush size by using your brackets. Bracket to the left, it's a square bracket by the way, not the parentheses but the bracket, to change your brush size. We're going to paint in, don't go overboard because you don't want to change the contours and the shapes of the person or the child. In this case, you don't want to change the contours of their face. So by switching from your foreground to your background color, you can seamlessly add the shadows and the smoothing to the skin that are needed if you lose the shadows and the highlights while you're manipulating. Think about the contours of the face and the way that the shadows and the lighting coming from what direction is going to relate to the shape of the person's face. By using the X hotkey, you can easily streamline your workflow by switching back and forth from your foreground and background color for ease of editing. Going off the eyeball just to make sure we're still on the right track. I'm going to put a little more shadow back in the top of his nose. If you go too far or you're getting this line that now he looks like he has a unibrow, Control Z and Control Alt Z will continue to step you backwards until you are at the point where everything is still good. Let's move down to his arms. Make my brush a little bit bigger, and switch to my foreground color, which is my highlight color, and slowly begin to do the same thing that we did on the face, putting back those highlights in and taking some of the blemishes off the skin, just smoothing everything out. And I'm going to switch to my background color, my shadows, and do the same thing. Like so. A little goes a long way, y'all. A little goes a long way. So he looks pretty good, all smoothed out. You can control plus and control minus to zoom in closer or further away, as we learned in our hotkey tutorial. If you're wanting to get rid of blemishes or lines on the skin and using the foreground background color technique is not working for you, you can use the spot healing brush tool, the one found here, or you can use your patch tool. I find it a little easier to use your spot healing brush tool. Do make sure to make your brush size the correct size, and by making small marks, remove areas of unwanted content. Don't make large areas like that, because you're going to mess up the integrity of the pixels, because what the spot healing brush tool does is it takes the average of the pixels around it and makes the correction. So the more pixels you have it choose from, the more it's going to affect the algorithm behind what the spot healing brush tool is going to take. So let's move on. We are in the basics section, so I'm going to be using a lot of these tools rather than using a lot of these filters. By using these tools, you can set the opacity, and it streamlines the workflow if you're in it to just get in and out and just basically work on your images as quickly as you can and do some basic edits and move forward. So let's jump into the Sharpen tool. The Sharpen tool you have to be really, really careful with, because the Sharpen is actually going to pixelate the image more than you think. So if you can do your strength or your opacity of the Sharpen tool around 20% or lower, let's put it at 10 just to be on the safe side, and we're going to go through and sharpen areas of his hair, his eyes, and his teeth. So going with the grain of the hair, we're going to sharpen it. And sharpen it, and sharpen it, and sharpen it, and just go all the way around on his hair to try to get it a little bit more detail. Areas where it's blown out a little bit, like the crown of his head over here, you can put a little bit more sharpening in it to pull out a little bit more of that detail, but don't go too much or else it will be pixelated, and you don't want it to be pixelated. Next, we're going to move on to his eyes. So just a few small sweeps on his eyes to really accentuate his eye and these beautiful eyelashes that he was blessed with. Just crazy, crazy eyelashes. They're gorgeous. And then we're going to go over his teeth 1 or 2 times just to make those areas stand out, because that's where you want the viewer's attention to go. Next, we're going to go to our dodge and burn. Dodge, of course, is going to pull out your highlights, and burn is going to burn in your shadows. So dodge, we're going to put a little bit of dodge on this area here where where the natural highlights will lie on someone's face, around the chin area, right here on the cupid's bow, and in the areas of the eyes, as well as here on the forehead, just to really pop those areas out, maybe even a little bit on his cheeks, and you can bring it here on his arms if you would like, if that's just something that something that you like. Let's switch over to the burn tool, which of course is going to burn in your shadows a little bit. Do try to keep your exposure percentage down just a little bit, just to make it manageable. And use these tools if this technique with the highlights and the shadows didn't do exactly what you want or bring you out the smoothest results. Now I am going to take this burn tool and just make a few sweeps on his shirt, just to see if we can tone down a little bit of the light spray that he's got on his shirt that kind of just it's a little distracting to me. So I don't know if it's a little distracting to you, but it's just an edit that I would like to make. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the skin tone with the shirt to try to tone that down a little bit as well. So we're going to do the selective color, I for eye drop, and select that blue color. B for brush, 5% opacity, let's go more like 10. And we'll just paint on a little bit to try to calm down the texture of the shirt. Control Z, I went a little bit too far on that one. And a little goes a long way. A little goes a long way. That's the before and after, so we can kind of see what we're working with. And it just cleans it up, tightens everything up, and makes everything look a little bit better. Now we're going to get to a few of these adjustment layers just to make sure that we have everything exactly the way we want it. We're going to start off with a brightness and contrast. The brightness is pretty good, but we are going to bump up our contrast a little bit to see if we can get a little bit more contrast in our image. And yeah, let's bring our brightness down just a little bit. Then we'll go into levels. If you watched my adjustment layers video, you'll know my levels trick of hitting your Alt or Option key while you move the sliders of the shadows and the highlight slider to get an idea of what's going to be the most acceptable adjustment for your levels adjustment. Next, we're going to move into vibrance because we have a lot of color, his blonde hair, everything's really, really nice. So we're going to move our vibrance up just a little bit. You don't want to go too far because that's going to give an unnatural skin tone. But the saturation, if you bring your saturation all the way down, you've turned it into a monochromatic or black and white image. But if you move it up slightly and just slowly move it up to get exactly what you want, you'll get the exact saturation and vibrance that you're looking for just through using the sliders for trial and error. Now here's my favorite thing. My favorite thing is this color balance when I'm working with portraits. I'm going to take this image into parts. You have the hair, you have the eyes, you have the shirt, and you even have some of this complexion in the skin tone that we'll make an adjustment with. Let's start with the hair. His hair is a blonde, almost like a strawberry blonde sort of situation. So I want to accentuate my yellows. And don't pay attention to anything other than the hair. Just the hair. Don't pay attention to anything else. Yellows and reds. I want to get that hair exactly like I like it, plus a little bit more. So I might even bump my magentas up a little bit. This is going to create a mask. You're going to Control or Command I to invert the mask and cover all of the adjustments that you've made. Now we are going to reveal only the hair of this mask. So make sure you are on black and white in this area here. You can use X to switch between, and if you can't locate your black or white, either come up to your swatches and locate it black and white, or you can just simply hit on this icon right here and it will switch back to black and white. So white to reveal, black to conceal, B for brush. Let's do it. We're going to come onto the hair. I'm 10%, 20%, that's kind of where you need to be because you want to make small adjustments. You don't want it to be a large adjustment. Just slightly paint in on that hair with the way the hair is. Don't move around any unnatural ways. Don't zigzag or anything. Just move with the natural shape of the hair. Blend it in and make sure not to go too far, because you want it to be a natural look, but you want to show off those beautiful, beautiful strawberry blonde hair that he has. And if it's something that you've gone too far, you can always adjust the opacity of the actual layer. But you want to sing where it comes to his hair because he's got some beautiful golden hair. Let's move on and do the next one, which is going to be his eyes. We're going to really bump up the green in his eyes. Don't pay attention to anything else other than his eyes. You don't want to make him look like a crazy person. You don't want to give him an unnatural color. So make sure not to go overboard. That looks good. Control I to invert the mask. B for brush. You're on white, so that's good to go. Make your brush a little bit smaller, and we're going to just click on his eye area to really make them pop, like so. Next is going to be his shirt. So we're going to bump up our blues, bump our cyans, and bump our magentas a little bit just to give a little bit of depth to that shirt. Control I to invert the mask. B for brush. Make sure you're good to go. 10% should probably still be good. You can even, let's stay with 10%. That's probably a safe place. And we're just going to paint in the color of his shirt to bump up that blue a little bit. like so. So little Zach looks pretty handsome, and I'm pretty proud of this. I hope this helped you on some basic edits. For a final tip, until we move on to Sydney's image, I'm going to show you what I like to call the claw move. I think I've used it probably in another tutorial, but the trick is to make like this background copy. You see how it's the whole image of him? What if I wanted to make an image on top of all these layers that included all these layers? So what I'm saying is I'm going to create a layer that incorporates all of these layers and just gives me a even canvas to work with. Control, Alt, Shift, E as in echo or everything. On a Mac, it's of course Command, Option, Shift, E as in everything. And it's going to give me a copy of all these layers down here combined. So what I can do now is select off of these layers, and I have a background layer here, which is our original. And with this eyeball, I can see that's our original and that's our edit. That's our original and that's our edit. So I could actually put a filter on this. I could, make a blending option or a blending mode on this layer here. I can do anything I want to do with an active layer. It's just this layer consists of all of these edits combined and without merging the visible layers. If I needed to go back and edit, I could come here and I could edit all of these layers under here and not lose the work that I've done if I need to go back and make an adjustment. So let's move on to our image of Sydney. This is an image I took by the river a couple months ago with a group of models I was working with, and this is Sydney, gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, and just a wonderful personality. She's wonderful. All the ladies we worked with that day were wonderful, and let's just get started. Let's get started. Same thing we did for Zach's picture. We're going to drag this down and create a layer copy. I'm going to go through and select my highlights. Down here on her chin is a pretty good highlight, and then a good shadow, average, probably right here on her cheek. That'll work. So we will go with our highlights first, opacity 10%, that'll work. Control plus, I'm going to use the wheel on my mouse to scroll up and make my brush a little bit smaller and just paint on in the highlight areas. On her shoulder. Now see, we're already getting some streaking. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that our opacity fits the crime. So if you need to go down a little bit more, go down. If you're painting at an opacity of 5% and you go over it twice, it's now at a 10% opacity. If you go over it another time, it's 15%, and so on. In these areas where it may be a little blown out, like right here on her thigh, feel free to paint that highlight color in just to tone down that highlight color where it might be blown out. The discoloration area, like seen here on her leg, you can mute it and tone it down a little bit with this highlight color, but you can also use your clone stamp and your spot healing brush tool to also make those corrections, or even your patch tool if you have enough quality tones to work with. When it comes to birthmarks, like seen here, or even freckles on somebody's face that are part of their identity, something that is unique to their body and form, I don't suggest changing it, but some post-production artists would disagree. So I'm going to leave that birthmark because that's the way I do it. If you wanted to change it, you can always use your sponge tool and do a spot selection and cover it up if that's something that you want to do, but it's not something that I want to do, so that's not what I'm going to do. This area down here where it looks like a little bit of bruising, I am going to cover that up, and then I'm going to use my content aware brush and smooth out some of this area in her knee where it looks like we were probably climbing around a little bit, so she probably had to kneel on some stuff and just left some unwanted marks on her legs. and then some areas down here on her foot that it's just, I find that a little bit distracting to the overall image, so I'm just going to soften it down, and I'll use the beaver brush and I'll use the highlights to really just smooth it down, like so. I don't want to eliminate it, I just want to make it less distracting. See? So let's move into the shadows. The shadowed areas, I want to follow the lines that are already provided for me when it comes to darkening these areas. I want to round out her legs and give her that crease in her legs that she had prior to. And maybe even accentuate a little bit, giving a little more strength to those arms and contour to her body. Don't forget to work back up to the face. Like so, and round out around the face as well. Like so. Now that's very, very basic in the beginning, just getting everything evened out, everything looking a little bit smoother, a little bit better. So let's get into a little bit more. I find this highlight right here, this little dapple of sunshine, I find it a little bit distracting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my spot healing brush tool, or you could do clone stamp if that's more your style, and just simply make a few clicks and get rid of it from being a distracting element. Next, I'm going to move into my sharpen, and I'm going to sharpen her eyes, and I'm going to sharpen her teeth, and I'm going to go through just like I did with Zach's and sharpen her hair. Like so. Next, I'm going to go to the dodge tool. I'm going to dodge a little bit from her eyes to really bring a little more color back. Dodge in her teeth a little bit to really make them pop. Don't go overboard with that because it will look fake. So something that we didn't do on Zach's image is to smooth out the skin. Most females, especially with modeling portfolios, they like you to smooth their skin out, whether it's an up-close personal portrait or a faraway portrait like this one of Sydney. We're going to smooth out her skin. She has a little bit of wrinkling here in her wrist. She's got a little bit of creasing and maybe some unattractive areas here in her skin that she might want to smooth out. So what I want to do is I want to do that same claw move, Control Alt Shift E, Command Option Shift E, and we're going to apply a filter. The reason why we created another layer is because we're going to create a mask on top of this layer, and we don't want to lose any of our edits here by having to uncover those masks as well. So blur, Gaussian blur. Don't escalate it very far so you can't tell what it is. We're smoothing her skin out. So find a happy medium somewhere in this area. Just play around with the sliders. Don't go too far down like you're not doing anything. We want to go a little bit further so that her skin blends. And it's always better to go a little higher than a little bit too low, because what we're going to do, like I said, is throw a mask, then Control I to invert the mask. Then we're going B for brush, make sure you're on white. Your opacity, you can change it to 10% or even 15 or 20%, but I like having a manageable amount. And then you're going to paint on that blur in areas where you're going to be softening that skin tone. Just very, very lightly. And the reason why you go a little more rather than a little less is so that in some areas of the image, like here on her thigh where I might want to go a little bit more than like on her arm, I can hit it a few more times with my brush and really smooth out that area more. Like so. Then come up to her face. Make sure not to go onto the areas where we've sharpened. And if you do go onto the areas where we've sharpened, just hit X to go to your background color and conceal that mask on that area. So take off the areas around her teeth that we sharpened, her eyes that we sharpened, and make sure to go back over just right around her face, like so. Next, same claw move, Control Alt Shift E to create another layer, and we're going to use this layer, Filter Liquify. So we're going to apply a filter called Liquify on this layer. It's going to be a very minor adjustment. Zoom in, same way you would with the normal workflow. And we're going to use the forward warp tool. What this does, and I'll show you, it's going to pull down right here, this peak area of her hair, to fill in this area that was a little bit distracting on the widow's peak of her hairline. That just was an open area and wasn't very flattering. Next, you can go into these areas where maybe the folds of her skin were not as attractive as you'd like them to be, and then of course on, you know, her legs, you can do that as well. Hit OK when you're through, and that will act as another adjustment layer. So the same way that we did it with Zach's image, we're going to go into brightness and contrast. Our brightness is pretty good. We may bump it up just a little bit, but our contrast, considering this is a little nook in a river area, I want to make it look a lot more intimate with a lot more contrast in these darker areas. Then I'm going to go to my levels adjustment, and with the same thing in mind as wanting a little bit more dramatic look to this intimate environment, like so. Manipulate your highlights and your shadows. You can even slide your midtones if you like. Then we'll go to vibrance and saturation, same way we did with Zach's image. Saturation, it's easy to go too far, so just be careful. And then we'll do the same color. What I'm going to do with this color though is I'm going to create almost a vignette of color around her, drawing the viewer's eye into the image to her face. So I'm going to start with this leaf area around her, and I'm going to create almost a green halo to accentuate this area here. Create a color balance layer, Control I to invert the mask, B for brush. Make sure you are on white, so X to change. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, 10% opacity is good. And I'm just going to create a vignette around this area to draw the viewer's attention towards the content of the image, which is Sydney. Like so. Then I'm going to do the same thing with this area in here, but I'm going to do a color balance, pulling out the reds and browns. So we'll bump up our reds, bump up our yellows, maybe even a little bit of magentas. Control I to invert the mask, B for brush, make sure you're in the right color. Brush a little bit smaller, and we're going to pull that color out of the woods area to give a little bit more depth and a little bit more color to these areas. If you find yourself putting too much green or doing too much on your mask that is not giving you the look that you want, feel free to go back to the other mask and conceal that part of the layer. Conceal that from the adjustment. Switch back to reveal on this layer here. And if you need to make an adjustment to the properties of the layer, so how much red, how much blue, all that kind of stuff, you can click on this icon here next to the mask and make the adjustments in real time. So if I wanted more red to these areas, more yellow to these areas that I've already painted, it will make that adjustment for me in real time. It's a little much, so we'll pull it down like so. Now let's get into her skirt and her hair. Her hair, I'm losing a lot of content because of the adjustment layer that we put behind her. So I want to really accentuate the yellow of her hair and separate it from the layer behind it. So I want to go away from the greens, I want to go away from the blues, I want to go away from the reds. Control I, B for brush, make sure we're revealing, and paint on with the direction of her hair, like so. Now I do have a little bit of green that crept over here, so I'm going to go down to my green color balance layer that I started off with to create that green vignette, and I'm going to conceal that mask on that area that I obviously went too far over into her hair to get her hair to stand out. If I wanted to go back to my main layer and burn a little bit darker areas into her hair to give more space behind, you could do that, but you would have to come down to the most recent layer copy that you made. So let's come back up to our color balance for our hair, like so. And since the properties of this also reflect the properties that we'd want on the skirt, I'm going to put in, B for brush, make sure you're on the mask, I'm going to paint in to accentuate the colors of that skirt while I have the properties that are reflected in the hair that also will help me out with the properties of the skirt to really boost the colors and help it stand out. Now let's do the claw move to see what we got. Click off all your eyeballs over here so we have a before and after. So that is our after, and that's our before. After, before. After, before. As you can see, there is a lot of drama that is added. This is great for Instagram or high fashion shoots where you have a lot more saturation in the backdrop and there's a lot more going on that's visually appealing rather than just a flat photo that really has nothing exciting going on. This has a lot of excitement going on. This has a lot of color, this has a lot of intrigue, and has a lot more contrast going on the accessories around her while drawing the eye from the viewer into the content of the image, which is the beautiful Miss Sydney. So I do hope that this video was helpful on how to do quick edits on portraits in Adobe Photoshop. Please leave in the comment section below any tips and tricks that I may have forgotten that you wish to share with your fellow post-production artists. Until next time, I am Jane Corley with Pic Visions. Please do make sure to like this video if you learned something new, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you can be notified every time a new video is uploaded every single Monday. Every Monday. And if you haven't done so already, please check out my Photography Friday class where I teach basics to advanced level photography as well as some tips and techniques to becoming your own media business owner. Look forward to seeing you guys next week and have a great week.